long ball is going to go for a touchdown. The game's over. Webster Slaughter.
Metcalf will go for the score. Unbelievable.
45-40. Run, William, run. He's got blockers in front. 5. Touchdown. Joshua Cribbs turns disaster into a score.
Sight wants it all on this one for Logan, and he is there.
Jim Brown to the 30. Jim Brown is going to go in for another touchdown.
The Cleveland Browns select Baker Mayfield.
Wow. It is Baker Mayfield.
Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to another episode of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am the host, Anthony Joki. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jack McCurry of the North Coast Sports. How you doing tonight, Jack?
I'm doing well, man. How are you? I know you were under the weather earlier this week.
Yeah, I still am. I'm trying to get better. You and I did record on Sunday after the Browns game. However, I never got around to editing the podcast because I was in bed sick for a couple of days. So I'm sorry for you listeners out there. Unfortunately, that one's not gonna make the cut. I feel bad, but unfortunately, health comes first, and it sucks that whenever the weather changes, I seem to get sick. So I swear I didn't get sick from being at the Browns game, but it's just a real pain in the ass every time I do. So that's why we're here. We're here to discuss the Browns and Saints matchup this Sunday. It's going to be a very interesting one. The Browns obviously coming off the tie with Pittsburgh. The Saints coming off a loss at home to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's weird to see that the Saints lose at home to Tampa Bay, so it kind of makes me think we could have a shot. But it's not going to be an easy matchup, that's for sure. But before we get into the game preview, there were some interesting comments made this week by Drew Brees. They asked Drew Brees about Baker Mayfield, and the overall headline was that Brees thinks that Baker could be better than himself. And here's a couple of quotes of what Brees said. He said that I followed his college career. I couldn't have been more impressed with what he was able to accomplish, especially last year. Really impressed with the way he plays the game. I think he's a great competitor. Jack, around the NFL draft process and the combine and whatnot, there were a lot of Drew Brees comparisons. Do you think those comparisons were fair? And, with the comments that Brees made this week to the media about Baker, do you think that the comparisons could be accurate?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think during the preseason, when you're watching cut-ups of Baker Mayfield, watching him out there on the field, I could see similarities between him and Drew Brees' game. I think that those compliments are very high, but it makes you wonder if, we're all there, or not all of us, but some of us are debating like how long until we see Baker Mayfield with the way Tyrod struggled out there on Sunday. And, maybe Drew Brees said that to rile up the fan base more, rile up the media a little bit. But I think those comparisons are definitely fair. Only time will tell if once Baker Mayfield gets out there, if he can be as good or even better, like Brees suggested, than Drew Brees. But it's always good when you hear players from opposing teams compliment our players because they see it as much as we see it. That the talent is definitely here in Cleveland.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've both have had some praise for Baker so far. Obviously with the little bit that we've seen, with how accurate he is. I think those comparisons can be fair. Brees called they're both in that 6 foot and under club. Even though Mayfield is 6'1", but it's close enough. A lot of people think that Baker might be too short to play quarterback, but if you can play quarterback, you can play quarterback. And to me, I think the biggest comparison between the two is one that and I mentioned this before, there's a piece that ESPN did, I think it was on Sports Science, and it was comparing Brees and Baker Mayfield, and it was the way that they throw the football. With Brees being 6 foot, he has to do a lot of things to prevent the ball from getting knocked down at the line of scrimmage. His arm angles at all times are completely different. He kind of throws completely over the top. And Baker does the same thing too. They did a really good job. I'll have to find that piece and see if I can tweet that out, because I thought it was a really telling, and it kind of eased some of my concerns about Baker with his throwing motion. So, I think that's one way that Baker can be successful is, with that throwing motion, and, the way he can get around, getting around those defensive linemen, knocking balls knocked down, and so on. We've seen here in the past, we've seen the tall guys like Brandon Whedon and Derek Anderson get footballs knocked down at the line of scrimmage, and they were 6'4", 6'5". It all depends on the throwing motion, and hopefully with Baker that his serves them well. And do you think that's something that will suit Baker well, is that throwing motion?
Yeah, definitely. When you're that short, that's one positive thing to have, is that you have that trajectory on your throws to where you can throw it over the line of scrimmage and not have to worry about batted balls, much like Anderson and Whedon did, like you said. So, that's one quality to have in a quarterback. It's also, another great quality that Baker's accurate with his throws. And when you look at Drew Brees, he's the most accurate quarterback in NFL history. So, if Mayfield's going to model his game after someone, comparable to the size and everything, Drew Brees is the perfect quarterback to model your game after.
Well, let's move on a little bit. We're going to move on to actually talking about the game. And before we wanted to do that, we wanted to look at some of the recent history. And, over the years, the Browns have completely owned the New Orleans Saints. The Browns have a 13-4 all-time record against New Orleans. Since 1999, they are 4-1. Of course, the only game that they didn't win was the opening day game back in 2006. So that kind of helped that streak continue. When you look at the success of the Browns over the Saints, Jack, what do you think has made the Browns successful over the years against them? Is it just bad matchups? Because there have been 3 matchups with Drew Brees. They're 2-1 in those. The Browns are 2-1 against the Saints in those matchups. What have the Browns been able to do so well in kind of handling Drew Brees?
I think the one big thing is, if you look back at these previous matchups, it was getting pressure on him. I can go back to the 2014 game. Very early on in the game, the crowd was loud. Paul Kruger got a sack and made him feel uncomfortable, but Brees adjusted. I think the one thing is, despite the Browns having the number of the Saints the last few matchups, Drew Brees has still found a way to put up some incredible numbers. It's just that the Browns have been able to outdo it and be better than him. But if you're gonna want to make a quarterback uncomfortable, it's putting pressure on him. You look back at 2010, David Bowens had 2 interceptions on him, took them both back for a touchdown. I think the defense got into him a couple times, sacked him a couple times. So that's one thing against these big time quarterbacks. You can't just lay down for them. You got to get in their face, create some pressure, and make them feel as uncomfortable as possible to hopefully that they make mistakes and the Browns defense would force turnovers.
And also in that 2010 game, there was a lot of trickery as well, including the Reggie Hodges fake punt. There was that long throwback, I think, from Cribbs to Eric Wright on the kickoff return. Eric Mangini kind of pulled out all the stops in that game to help beat the Saints. I think the biggest thing for me is we know how potent the Saints offense is, and in the last 3 games against the Saints, they've scored 19 points, 17 points, and 24 points. So defense has really been strong against Drew Brees. Now, obviously, We haven't played them since 2014. I don't even know if there's a player on the Browns left from 2014 or not. I don't think there is. But it's going to be an interesting matchup this Sunday. So let's move into our keys to the game, and we'll start with offense. When you look at our offense, and it struggled this last game against Pittsburgh. They did a decent job running the football. They had, I want to say, over 150 yards rushing. I think close to 180. 77 of those I think were from Tyrod. So, what do the Browns have to do offensively to be successful against New Orleans, who gave up over 40 points to Tampa Bay?
Well, I went back and watched the Tampa Bay New Orleans game, thanks to NFL Game Pass. Which, if you're a football fan and you want to start to learn to watch tape to hopefully be like our buddy Jake Burns, or just you love football and you want to go back and watch the games from this year or previous years, it's a great tool to have, and thank you to the NFL for applying that for the fans. But the one thing when I was watching the Saints defense, obviously they're good at stopping the run. Peyton Barber from Tampa had some good runs, but for the most part, the Saints defense shut them down. When you're looking at this game, I don't know if we're going to be able to run the ball against them. So it's going to come down to the passing game. And obviously Tyrod Taylor struggled against Pittsburgh with, all the weather elements, but now he'll be in the dome. Ryan Fitzpatrick had an unbelievable performance, but I think it was more in part to the wide receiver play, and that was Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson for Tampa. Here in Cleveland, we got Jarvis Landry and Josh Gordon, which is a good tandem on paper. We've seen a little bit of it last week against Pittsburgh. Hopefully we see a lot of it in the Superdome. Watching the cornerback play closely, New Orleans was running a lot of man defense based on the tape that I watched. And you got Marshawn Lattimore, who was their top pick last year, I think was Defensive Rookie of the Year, had an unbelievable season. He had a tough time against Mike Evans. One play, I think it was a 60-yard touchdown. He was real close to the line of scrimmage, and that's how the Saints cornerbacks play. Mike Evans beat him in speed, and I think Jarvis Landry definitely has speed. Josh Gordon has some speed. It's going to be up to Tyrod Taylor in those one-on-one situations against Lattimore that he, throws the perfect ball, because, Lattimore can beat you, but if you got these guys that are deep threats like Josh Gordon, like a Landry, maybe even Antonio Callaway, you got to throw the perfect ball. Last week, late in regulation, Tyrod underthrew a pass to Gordon that could have been the game-winning touchdown, and it got picked off. So the one matchup I'm going to watch is Lattimore versus whoever the Browns throw at him at wide receiver, because Lattimore is beatable, and it showed last week against Mike Evans. I'm also going to watch the safeties, because the safeties were mismatched definitely when against a speed threat. Deshaun Jackson burned them for like a 55-yard touchdown. So maybe if they put Callaway or they put Gordon in the slot, the safeties are definitely a mismatch in one-on-one situations.
Yeah, I think this week, last week with it being so rainy and so wet, they really couldn't showcase their speed. I think this week that's something they're really going to showcase. You have Josh Gordon, you have Antonio Callaway. Both of those guys can stretch the defense. You have Landry, that could find spots over the middle to settle down in. I think they're really going to utilize David Njoku. Obviously, I think they're going to continue to try to get Duke Johnson involved. It's going to be an interesting game plan. I'm curious to see what Hugh and Todd are going to do offensively this week as compared to last week. There was a lot of missed opportunities, I would say, on Sunday, not with the fact that a lot of guys being wide open, but I think that there were a lot of throws that were made, that could have been caught. Some of those were Njoku. There were a couple to Landry as well. I think a couple more that could have been caught as well. Hopefully they get Josh more involved. He only had 3 targets last week. He is listed as the official starter this week. We'll see if he's out there for the first play or not. I think one of the major keys offensively is blocking up front. And obviously the Saints still have Cameron Jordan up front. And he's probably going to go up against Desmond Harrison. Is that one matchup that you're really looking forward to seeing how it plays out this week?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was watching the tape, I noticed that, Tampa's offensive line gave Fitzpatrick time, but when he was getting pressured, he would take off and run, which is, will work in our favor because Tyrod Taylor can obviously run. He ran for almost 80 yards and a touchdown last week. But, he had time to throw, though, at some points, and he was able to make those key passes and those long passes to Jackson and Evans and O.J. Howard and all the weapons on that Tampa offense. But Desmond Harrison, going back and watching, he wasn't as bad as people thought he was. Yeah, the numbers will say he wasn't that good. He was good pass blocking. He was terrible run blocking, according to Pro Football Focus, and it does back that up when you watch the tape. That's going to happen when you have an undrafted rookie, and it's going to happen when you shuffle the offensive line the week of the home opener. But I think he's going to get better as time progresses. It's a veteran-laced offensive line, him being the exception, obviously, as the rookie. But I think this offensive line will get better. Obviously, you got to watch that right tackle position as well, with Chris Hubbard going up against Marcus Davenport, who was the Saints' #1 pick this year. So obviously, the blocking up front is definitely going to be key, and it's also going to be key for Tyrod to get the ball out quicker. I know he had like 2.9 seconds to throw last week, which was 7th best, but you also got to take into account he does scramble a lot, and recent history shows that he took the longest to throw out of any quarterback the last several years. So I think that number is going to go up. But it's up to Tyrod to get the ball out quicker, and it's up for the line to give him enough time to make those throws.
You mentioned earlier that the Saints played a lot of man coverage, and I really think that benefits the Browns a lot because of Tyrod's ability to run the football. When you have man coverage, it's tough to keep an eye on a quarterback unless they have a set spy out there on Tyrod at all times. So, when you have man coverage and you have a running quarterback, sometimes it cannot end up well for your defense. And I think that's what Tampa Bay did really well last week with Fitzpatrick. Able to rush for a few first downs and keep some drives going. And, that's ultimately why they scored over 40 points in the game last week. If there's one player on offense this week that you're looking at to kind of have a breakout, who would that be?
Oh, I think it's Josh Gordon. You look last week, he was only targeted 3 times despite playing 69 snaps after all the reports that he wasn't going to start, which I still think Haley did that because he said today, he goes, I'm putting out the guys that I think is going to give us the best chance to win. And like I said, Gordon played a lot of snaps. He was only targeted 3 times. Obviously, another week of practice under his belt, another week building that chemistry with Tyrod Taylor. I think he's the guy that's going to break out this week. I think his targets are going to go up, and I think if he can get the ball in his hands and, in certain situations, we all know how good Josh Gordon can be. I would expect him to have a breakout performance this week.
Let's switch to the defense. And, the Browns defense played pretty well against Pittsburgh. The offense, they did everything they could, but the offense couldn't bail them out at all. I would say that the defense bailed out the offense a ton this last weekend. We talked about how the Browns have had success in the past against Drew Brees, and that's getting pressure on him. Obviously, the Browns have multiple guys along that front seven that can create pressure. You have Myles Garrett, you have Jannard Avery. We won't have Emmanuel Ogbah. They have Jamie Collins. They do have 2 pretty good tackles in Teron Armstead and Ryan Ramczyk, who was their first-round pick last year. What do obviously the Browns are going to try to create pressure, but what do the Browns need to do specifically on defense to keep Drew Brees at bay?
Like I said, they're going to have to pressure him. And, New Orleans only gave up 1 sack last week. And, watching them, they give Brees time to throw, but he also gets that ball out very quick. So, and, the one stat this week was Myles Garrett sacked Ben Roethlisberger at 1.97 seconds, which was the quickest sack in the last, I think, 6 or 7 years. So Myles Garrett right off the off the snap's going to have to get back there and pressure Brees. And if he can, I think it's going to be great for our secondary because when you get pressure on him, it's going to make bad throws. Now, the one thing is Brees makes quick reads and quick decisions, so he can either get the ball away or check down to Kamara. So the one thing is they're going to have to find a way to create pressure. And like you said, they do have a strong offensive line. Armstead and Ramczyk are really good or decent tackles. Andres Pete is on the injury report this week. He's one of their guards, so that should be something to watch. So maybe Ogunjobi, or they kick Myles Garrett inside. They can get pressure in the middle. But, generating pressure and making Brees uncomfortable in the pocket is going to be the key to victory, I think, for the Browns this week on the defensive side.
The Browns did give up over 100 yards to James Conner last week. This week they have Alvin Kamara, who's a much better back. What do the Browns have to do differently defensively to kind of keep Kamara under control?
I think they, you look at the running game, the outside was the biggest weakness, and I think that's on the linebacker play, obviously needs to step up. Inside, I think they were good against Connor. The one thing about the Saints running game right now, they're missing Mark Ingram, who's their downfield runner. They have Kamara, who's so dynamic, and if he's struggling to run the ball, it only is going to open up the passing game for him, which was apparent last week. He had 9 catches and over 100 yards for, receiving. So the one thing, I think they just need to keep doing what they're doing. And, last week they really didn't have any of their new guys playing. I think this week you're going to see Carl Davis out there. You're going to see Ifadi, the waiver claim pickup from the Vikings. You're going to see Anthony Zettel, who was a strong run defender in Detroit last year. So the Browns, while they're going to miss Emmanuel Ogbah, I think you're going to see some of their new pickups come in and play, and I think those are going to help in the run defense, definitely.
The Saints have 2 pretty good Buckeyes at wide receiver, Michael Thomas and Ted Ginn. What does the Browns Buckeye Denzel Ward have to do against these 2 really good wide receivers? Obviously, Thomas and Ginn can both stretch the field, so I would say a lot of focus would have to be on Denzel Ward and the rest of the cornerbacks to be physical against these guys, correct?
Yeah, definitely. Denzel Ward, it doesn't get any easier for him and his start to his NFL career. Last week was on Antonio Brown, was on Juju Smith-Schuster. This week he's on Michael Thomas, who set a Saints franchise record for 16 catches last week. He also had 180 yards and a touchdown. That Saints offense is so dynamic. There's so many playmakers. We already talked about Kamara, Michael Thomas, Ted Ginn still doing it, year 11 in the league. You got Ben Watson at tight end. There's so many playmakers that this Browns defense needs to focus in on. And also Austin Carr, who showed flashes for the Patriots in the preseason last year. Now he's with the Saints, and he had a solid preseason once again. Is their 3rd wide receiver, and they're going to have to keep an eye on him as well. So Drew Brees always has solid playmakers around him. He makes the most out of those opportunities of all the playmakers he's got. So like you said, Thomas and Ginn especially, those guys can get downfield, but they can also beat you in a possession game. So the Browns defenders, I noticed on film, Greg Williams is trusting this secondary more, and they're playing more to the line of scrimmage, but there's still some points where he's playing them too far off the line of scrimmage. And with a guy like Michael Thomas, you don't want to do that with Ginn. I guess it would be okay because Ginn is more of a vertical deep threat just because of his speed. But with Thomas, I would play Ward close to him because Thomas can get you with like a 7-8 yard catch and then turn upfield. You want to limit him as much as possible.
I didn't realize how many Buckeyes the Saints have. They have Michael Thomas, they have Ted Ginn, they have Kurt Coleman, Von Bell, and Marshawn Lattimore. So they have quite a few Buckeyes down there in New Orleans. I would say the last focus on our defense is a former Cleveland Brown, and that's Ben Watson. The Browns have continued to have struggled covering tight ends, and Ben Watson has been doing this for a very long time, and he's very good at what he does. What do the Browns need to do anything different to cover tight end, or is Watson someone that they could let a 4 beat them as long as it's not Ginn and Thomas deep?
No, I think it was apparent last year when Watson was with the Baltimore Ravens. In 2 games with against the Browns, he had 12 catches on 12 targets for 165 yards and 1 touchdown. Ben Watson, he's 37 years old, soon to be 38 years old, and he's still showing that he can be a reliable receiving tight end in this league. And, somebody had made the comment that the Browns linebackers weren't good. They said this last week during the Pittsburgh game. And, I was off Twitter most of the game, but I seen that tweet and I had to chime in. I said, you forgot to add the word coach. And I think Blake Williams, who is the son of Greg Williams, and he's the linebackers coach, is not putting these guys in the right role, and he's not utilizing these talented linebacker group that we have. And it's unfortunate because you're wasting the talents of Christian Kirksey and Joe Schobert and Jamie Collins and James Burgess once he comes back from the concussion, which he will this week. The linebackers have struggled under his watch, and it's it needs to step up because you're facing another strong tight end this week in Watson, and he killed you in 2 games last week. And if you leave him open and you don't keep him covered, he's going to kill you again for the 3rd game in a row that he's faced the Browns.
Who's the Saints kick return and punt return? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it's Tommy Lee Lewis. I think that's the name.
How did they do last week in terms of kick returns and punt returns?
He didn't do much. He was a lot of them were fair catches. There really wasn't a strong kick return game in that game. Despite 88 points, they were both sides of the ball were very limited on their returns.
Is special teams, particularly, obviously punt return and kick return, is that something that you worry about with the Browns?
Yeah, definitely. I think last week Switzer for Pittsburgh got some good returns on us. Obviously, the special teams coach, he had a bad rep coming from Arizona, and I haven't been very positive on the special teams performances so far through preseason and obviously last week against Pittsburgh. So obviously the coaching's not good because the performance hasn't been good. And I'm not faulting Colquitt and Zane on their performances last week just because the elements were a little outrageous for them to kick and punt in. But the special teams tackling definitely needs to step up.
All right, let's get to the fun part here. Give me your prediction for Sunday. I would say after our first week, do you want to consider that a loss since we there wasn't a true winner? Should we call it a tie? What should we do with that? Should we just say we're 0-1 to start the year?
We'll go ahead and say we're 0-1 because yeah, I mean it's a tie. It's not a win. It's not a loss. It's a tie.
All right. But, all right. Give me your prediction for this Sunday then.
We're going down to New Orleans, and that place is going to be loud and it's going to be intense. And I look at this New Orleans Saints team, and I can't see them losing 2 games in a row in New Orleans. I can't see Drew Brees, after completing 82%, throwing for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, to be denied a win. I think Teddy Bruschi said it best today on NFL Live. He goes, if Drew Brees has to score 60 points to win a football game, he's going to do it. And while I like what I saw out of the Browns defense last week, I do think they're going to hit a roadblock this week. They're going to have a tough time because, like I said, there's so many weapons on the Saints offense. It's going to be tough to stop them. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm going to go with my prediction. I think the Saints win 27-13.
All right. I think for some reason this game's going to be really high scoring. I think the Browns offense is going to start to click, but much like you, I think the Saints offense is also going to be ready to fire back after last week. So I'm going to go with the Saints 41-34 over the Browns. I think it's going to be a real high scoring affair this week. Hopefully the Browns can prove both of us wrong this week. I would happily take a loss in terms of overall predictions for this week. So, I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, definitely. I could see this being a high-scoring game. I think the Saints' defense is definitely vulnerable, but they could always turn it around. This is a game where you don't know. Maybe the Saints are going to come out and just dominate the Browns offense and just say, last week was a fluke. We are legit like we were last season, but could also be a trap game for them where they think they're going to come in and just shut the Browns down. The Browns come in and they put up 30 or 40 points on them as well. So it'll be a very interesting game to watch though on Sunday.
Before we get out of here, is there anything else you want to discuss, or is that it?
No, we covered everything this week.
All right. Well, then go ahead and plug everything as you normally do.
Yeah, as always, check out my website, thenorthcoastsports.com. We'll definitely have pre- and post-game coverage of the Browns game this weekend, as well as Ohio State as they go down to Texas to battle TCU. Follow me on Twitter at JMcCurryCLE. And check out the other podcasts that myself and Anthony do, the North Coast Sportscast. It's available on any podcast platform as well as YouTube. You can find that on Twitter at NC Sportscast. Hopefully we get a new episode out soon for you guys.
I was going to pitch an idea to you. Maybe we could do a quick post-game show on Saturday night after the Buckeyes game. We'll discuss it. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Anthony Joki, Joki. You can follow the podcast on Twitter and on Facebook at 1085 Gridiron. We are now on iHeartRadio, which I don't think I had told Jack yet, but I just got the email a couple of days ago that we got approved for that. So we're now on iHeartRadio. We're also on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, pretty much on every podcasting platform you can think of. We're on. So there's really no excuse that you can't listen to us. We're even on YouTube as well. So, we did our best to get on every platform, and I think we managed to do that finally. Be sure to subscribe, rate, review our podcast. We'd absolutely appreciate it. I think we're up to around 10 reviews over on iTunes. Continue to drop us a review, drop us a 5-star rating. We'd absolutely appreciate it. And with all that, we'll talk to you on Sunday after the Browns game. But until then, and as always, go Browns.